It was nearly sunset when I heard the knock. Sharp, fast, desperate. I opened the door to find my oldest son, Kyle, standing on the porch of the land he once mocked me for tending. His face was pale. His voice cracked as he said, "Dad, I know I said some awful things, but I need your help, please." I should have slammed the door right then and there, after what they did to me at the family meeting, calling me useless, saying I was too old to manage the land, mocking the same soil I broke my back to preserve. After hearing them plot to take my property behind my back, without even the decency to ask, I had every reason to turn him away. But I didn't, because unlike them, I knew what it meant to be a father. This is my story. I've always believed that land tells its own story. Mine stretches 40 acres outside Cedar Falls, Iowa, fertile soil that's been in my family for 3 generations. I'm Raymond Walker, Ray to most folks, and at 64, I know every inch of this place like I know the lines on my palms. My grandfather left me this land, and I built the house that stands on it with my own 2 hands, the same hands that held my wife Martha's as she took her final breath 7 years ago. Cancer took her quickly, but not before she made me promise to keep the family together, to make sure our 3 children always had a place to call home. Our oldest, Kyle, is 36 now, always ambitious, always in a hurry. He owns an auto shop in Des Moines, drives a truck that costs more than I made in 3 years of farming. Nathan is 33, the middle child, with middle child syndrome, never quite satisfied, always looking for shortcuts. And Emily, my baby girl at 30, works in marketing in Chicago. She visits the least, calls the most. At least she used to. That September morning started like any other. The harvest was coming in nicely, and I was up at dawn checking the north field. Fall in Iowa paints everything gold. The cornfields, the afternoon, light, even the dust in the air. I breathed it all in, grateful for another season. The Walker family meeting was something Martha started when the kids were young. Once a year, we'd all gather, talk about our lives, make plans. It was her way of keeping us connected, even as the kids grew up and moved away. I've kept the tradition alive, though it feels more like obligation than celebration these days. I spent the morning preparing, made Martha's cornbread recipe, set out the good plates in the dining room. I even cut fresh flowers from Martha's garden, zinnias and black-eyed Susans that she planted years ago and somehow keep coming back. Kyle arrived first, earlier than expected. He had a leather portfolio under his arm and was on his phone as he walked in. No hug, just a distracted pat on my shoulder. "Looking a bit run down out there, Dad," he said, glancing out the window at the barn I'd been meaning to repaint. "Ever think about selling this place? You could get a nice condo in town, no maintenance." I laughed. "And do what all day? Watch the shopping network." He didn't laugh back. Nathan showed up 20 minutes late, as usual. He headed straight for the fridge, grabbed a beer, and flopped onto the couch like he was 16 again. "The guest house toilet's running," he said instead of hello. "You should get that fixed." The guest house. That's what we call the small cabin on the east side of the property, where Nathan stays temporarily, whenever he's between jobs or relationships. He's been temporarily living there rent-free for almost 2 years now. Emily arrived. Last, fresh from the airport. She at least gave me a hug, but it was quick, distracted. She was already looking at her phone before she even let go. "Sorry I'm late, Dad. Work is crazy." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "The place looks exactly the same." I'm not sure what I expected. Maybe that at least one of them would notice the new fence posts I'd put in or ask about the apple trees that were having their best season in years. Instead, they moved around my home like tourists in a museum, curious but disconnected. We sat down for the meeting after lunch. I'd made notes about potentially selling a small corner of the property. I'd been thinking about building a smaller place for myself, something easier to manage as I got older. Maybe I'd put Emily's name on part of the orchard. She always loved those trees as a child. But before I could even open my mouth, Kyle cleared his throat and placed that leather portfolio on the table. "Dad, we've been talking," he started, glancing at his siblings. "We think it's time to put the land into younger hands." I blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" Kyle pulled out some papers, legal documents with little yellow tabs marking signature lines. "It's simple, really. For tax purposes and estate planning, we should transfer the property control to the 3 of us now. You'd still live here, of course," he added quickly. but the burden of managing everything would be off your shoulders. I looked at the papers, then at my children's faces. Nathan was nodding along, picking at his fingernails. Emily was scrolling through, her phone barely present. I don't understand, I said slowly. This is my home. I'm not ready to hand it over. Nathan sighed, the dramatic kind that teenagers perfect. Dad, you're not getting any younger. You can't keep up with this place. The north fence is falling down, the barn needs work, and let's be honest, you're letting good land go to waste. I fixed the north fence last week. I said quietly. Nobody seemed to hear me. Kyle continued, his voice taking on that tone people use with small children or the very elderly. It's 40 acres, Dad. That's a lot for one person to maintain, especially someone your age. My age? I repeated. I've never felt old until that moment. Tired sometimes, sure. Lonely, definitely. But not old, not incapable. We're just trying to help, Emily finally chimed in, placing her phone face down on the table. We worry about you out here all alone. You worry? I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped. Is that why none of you have visited in months? Why I had to call the plumber myself when the pipe burst in February? Because you're worried? The room grew tense, cold. Kyle's salesman's smile faltered. Look, Dad, let's be practical. Here, you're not exactly pulling your weight anymore. This land is going to waste with you just puttering around. He hesitated, then said it. You're useless now. Useless. The word hung in the air like poison. 64 years on this earth. 40 years working this land, 36 years raising children, and now I was useless. I sat in stunned silence as my children began, discussing the land as if I was already dead. Kyle talked about subdividing the eastern section for development. Nathan wanted to sell the timber rights to the wooded area. Emily mentioned something about an organic farm co-op that might be interested in leasing the fields. Of course, we'd cut you a small monthly stipend, Kyle added, as if throwing a bone, so you can live comfortably while we manage everything. I looked at my children, really looked at them. When did they become these people? These strangers wearing my children's faces, discussing how to divvy up what I'd spent my life building, what their mother and I had dreamed would keep our family rooted for generations? Without a word, I stood up and walked out of the room. I didn't slam doors or raise my voice. I simply left them to their plotting and went to my bedroom, Martha's and mine, and closed the door quietly behind me. Through the walls, I could hear them still talking, their voices rising and falling like vultures circling. I sat on the edge of the bed, the same bed where I'd held Martha's hand while she passed away, and for the first time since her funeral, I wept. Morning came with the same golden light it always did. The world doesn't stop turning just because your heart breaks. The chickens still needed feeding. The garden still needed tending. Life still demanded living. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table. My children had gone to their rooms late last night. Kyle in the guest room, Nathan to the guest house, Emily to her old bedroom. The house was quiet, but it wasn't peace I felt. It was resolve. The word useless had burned itself into my mind, but something else had too. Clarity. For years, I'd been their safety net. When Kyle needed a down payment for his auto shop, I sold my prized vintage tractor. When Nathan got into legal trouble 3 years back, I paid his attorney fees. When Emily's car broke down last winter, I not only sent money for repairs, but continued paying her. Insurance, all without complaint, all without expectation of repayment, just the quiet hope that they understood sacrifice, appreciated it, that they saw me. They didn't. I was out the door before any of them woke up. First stop, Cedar Falls, First National Bank. Sandra, the manager, has known me for 30 years. Her father and mine used to fish together. Ray, what brings you in so early? She smiled, then noticed my expression. Everything all right? Need to make some changes, Sandra, I said quietly. To my accounts. I closed the joint account I'd opened with Kyle years ago when he was first starting his business. I removed my name from several automatic payments, Nathan's cell phone bill, Emily's car insurance, the credit card I kept active for family emergencies that somehow always included Emily's weekend trips with friends. Next stop, Layton & Sons, the law office downtown. James Layton Jr. had handled Martha's will and all our legal matters for decades. This is quite a change, Ray, James said, reviewing my instructions. Are you sure? Never been more sure of anything, I replied. By noon I had rewritten my will, placing the land in a trust that none of my children could touch unless they wanted to buy me out at full market value. The trust ensured the property would remain intact until after my death, at which point they could decide its fate together. I drove home slowly, taking the scenic route past Taylor Creek, where Martha and I used to picnic. The trees were starting to turn, splashes of red and orange among the green. Martha always said, "Fall was God's way of showing that change can be beautiful." When I pulled up to the house, all three of their cars were still there. I could see them through the dining room window, still sitting at the table, papers spread out, planning my retirement without me. I didn't go inside. Instead, I walked to the barn, took out my tools, and drove to the guest house. Nathan was inside. I could hear his music playing, but I didn't knock. I simply shut off the water main that fed the small building, then disconnected the electric line that ran from my meter to his place. If he wanted utilities, he could pay for them himself. Then I went to the garage and uncovered the old family truck, a 1972 Ford F-100 that had been my father's. I'd kept it in perfect condition, thinking maybe one of the kids would want it someday. I took one last look at it, then drove it into town to see Harry at the used car lot. "You sure about this, Ray?" Harry asked as he handed me the check. "This truck's practically family." "That's why it deserves better," I said, pocketing the check. I stopped by St. Mark's Church on my way home and gave the entire amount to Pastor Wilson for the food bank. Martha had always believed in tithing, in giving back. It felt right. By the time I returned home, it was late afternoon. All three kids were on the porch waiting. Kyle stepped forward, his face tight with anger. "Dad, what the hell? The bank called me. You closed our account." "My account," I corrected. "I just let you use it." Nathan was pacing, phone in hand. "The water's off at the guest house, and the power." "What's going on?" Emily stood slightly apart, arms crossed. "My credit card got declined at lunch, the emergency one. They said it was cancelled." I looked at my three children, these adults who had come from Martha and me, who we had raised with love and sacrifice. I felt a deep sadness, but not regret. Never regret. "I've been thinking about what you all said yesterday," I spoke calmly. "About me. Being useless. About putting the land in younger, more capable hands. And you know what? You were right about one thing. I have been too generous." "Dad," Kyle started, but I held up my hand. "No, let me finish. This land is mine. The house is mine. Everything here I either inherited honestly or built with my own two hands, and not one of you has the right to decide when or how I give it up." I walked past them up the porch steps. "The guest house utilities are in your name now, Nathan. Bills due on the 1st of the month. Emily, you're 28 years old with a good job. Time to pay your own car insurance. And Kyle, if you want to discuss property transfers, you can talk to James Layton. He has my new will on file." Kyle's face flushed red. "You can't be serious. After everything." "After everything what?" I asked, genuinely curious. "After all I've done for you three? All the times I've bailed you out, supported you, loved you even when you didn't call for months? Yes, after everything, I'm still your father. But I'm not your bank, and I'm certainly not useless." I opened the front door and paused. "You're all welcome to stay for dinner. After that, I think. It's time you headed back to your own lives, the ones you've built so far away from here." With that, I went inside, closing the door gently behind me. That night, I ate alone at the kitchen table. All three of them had packed up and left without another word. The house felt emptier than it had in years, but somehow I felt fuller, stronger. Martha would have understood. She'd always said that love sometimes means setting boundaries. It had taken me 64 years to learn that lesson. I washed my dishes, turned out the lights, and headed to bed. Tomorrow would be another day on the land that was still mine, the land I was still perfectly capable of tending. And for the first time in years, I slept without worry. Silence has its own language. After my children left, the farm spoke to me in a different way. The creak of the porch swing wasn't loneliness anymore. It was contemplation. The empty rooms weren't abandoned. They were peaceful. I found myself talking to Martha more, sitting in her garden with coffee at dawn, telling her about our children, about my broken heart, about my newfound resolve. "They'll come around," I told her ghost, "or they won't. Either way, I'll be here." 3 weeks passed without a word from any of them. No calls, no texts, no emails. I didn't reach out either. Some distances need to grow before they can shrink again. I threw myself into work, harvested the last of the season's crops, prepared the fields for winter, repainted the barn a rich, deep red that stood out against the autumn sky. I joined the men's group at church, started having coffee with old friends I'd neglected. Life continued, and to my surprise, it wasn't half bad. Then the bills started arriving, in their names. The property tax notice came first, addressed to Kyle Walker. Seems he'd filed paperwork to have tax bills redirected to him, probably part of their plan to take over. The amount due was substantial. 40 acres of prime Iowa farmland doesn't come cheap. Next came a notice from the county about code violations at the guest house. Without utilities, Nathan had apparently abandoned it without properly winterizing the plumbing. A pipe had burst, causing water damage. Since the structure was technically on my property, I was liable unless I could prove Nathan's tenancy. Then Emily's insurance company called, asking why the payments had stopped on a car that was still registered at my address. The vehicle was at risk of having its registration suspended. I placed each notice in a neat folder labeled "Not My Problem" and set it on the kitchen counter. Martha would have scolded me for the pettiness, but Martha wasn't here to see how our children had tried to strip me of my dignity. October turned to November. The first snow fell, light and hesitant, just enough to dust the fields in white. I stocked the freezer, filled the woodshed, and winterized the tractor. Years of Iowa winters had taught me to prepare early. It was a Tuesday evening when the first call came. I was making soup, the radio playing Johnny Cash low in the background, when my phone lit up with Kyle's name. I let it ring. It rang again 10 minutes later, and again after dinner. By bedtime, he'd called 7 times and left 3 messages. I didn't listen to them. The next morning, I drove into town for my weekly breakfast at Maggie's Diner. James Layton waved me over to his booth. "Your son's been calling my office," he said, pouring cream into his coffee. "Seems he's having trouble with the tax bill. Is that right?" I buttered my toast without looking up. "Ray." James's voice softened. "I've known you 30 years. Known your kids since they were in diapers. Whatever's happened between you all, is it worth this?" I set down my knife. "They called me useless, James. Tried to take my land while I sat right there at the table. Tell me, what would you have done?" He didn't have an answer for that. "I'm not being vindictive," I continued. "I'm teaching them. Something their mother and I clearly failed to instill. Respect, appreciation, basic human decency." James nodded slowly. "Kyle mentioned something about the taxes being higher than he expected." I laughed without humor. Funny how property looks less appealing when you're the one paying for it. We finished our breakfast talking about safer topics: the weather, the Bears' terrible season, the new highway extension. But as I was leaving, James caught my arm. "They're still your children, Ray, even when they disappoint you." I nodded. "That's why this hurts so damn much." The calls increased over the next week. Kyle daily, Nathan occasionally, Emily once. I still didn't answer. Instead, I drove to Des Moines one afternoon and parked across from Kyle's auto shop. Business looked slow. The flashy sign he'd installed last year was missing a few bulbs, and only 2 cars sat in the service bay. I didn't go in, just watched for a while, wondering what had happened to the boy who used to follow me around the farm, asking endless questions about engines and how things worked. The boy who cried when his pet rabbit died, who hugged me so tight on his wedding day, whispering, "I hope I can be half the dad you are." Where had that boy gone? When had he turned into this man who could look me in the eye and call me useless? I drove home with more questions than answers. December arrived with bitter cold and more snow. I was chopping wood one morning when I heard a car coming up the drive, an unfamiliar sedan with rental plates. It parked, and Emily stepped out, wrapped in a coat too. Light for Iowa winter. She stood by her car, hesitant, until I set down my axe and walked over. "Dad," she said, her breath clouding in the cold air. "You look good." I waited. "I've been trying to call." "I know." She shifted her weight, glancing at the house. "Can we talk inside? It's freezing." I led her in without a word, put on coffee, and sat at the kitchen table. She remained standing, looking around at the familiar space as if seeing it for the first time. "You repainted," she finally said. "Last month. It looks nice. Mom would have liked the blue." I nodded, waiting for her to get to the point. Emily had always been the most direct of my children. "I lost my job," she finally said, sinking into a chair. "Budget cuts. And my roommate moved out, so the rent's doubled. And my car—" She stopped, looked down at her hands. I can't afford the insurance, and now they're saying the registration is expired, and there's a fine, and you need money, I finished for her. Her cheeks flushed. It's not just that. I miss you. I miss home. Do you? I poured coffee into 2 mugs, sliding one toward her. Or do you miss what home provides? Safety, security, someone to fix your problems. That's not fair, she whispered. No, it wasn't fair when you sat silent while your brothers called me useless. It wasn't fair when you discussed selling pieces of my land as if I wasn't in the room. None of that was fair, Emily. Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't agree with them. I just didn't know what to say. Silence is its own kind of agreement. She wiped her eyes. No, I'm sorry. I believed her. Of my 3 children, Emily had always been the most sensitive, the most easily swayed by her older brothers. It didn't excuse her behavior, but it made it more understandable. I can't give you money, I said finally, but you can stay here for a while if you need to. The east bedroom is made up. Relief flooded her face. Really? You'd let me come home? On one condition, I added, my voice firm. You work. Not just around the house, but find something in town. Pay your own way, and when spring comes, we'll reassess. She nodded quickly. I will. I promise. Thank you, Dad. That night, Emily slept in her childhood bedroom while I sat up late in the living room, wondering if I'd made the right choice. Martha would have welcomed her back without. Conditions would have forgiven all 3 of them instantly, but Martha had a softer heart than mine, and Martha hadn't been the one they'd called useless. Emily stayed 2 days before Kyle showed up. The knock came just before sunset. Sharp, fast, desperate. I knew who it was before I opened the door. Kyle stood on the porch, looking nothing like the confident businessman who'd tried to take my land 2 months earlier. His face was pale, his clothes rumpled. He'd lost weight. Dad, he said, his voice cracking, I know I said some awful things, but I need your help. Please. I should have felt satisfaction seeing him brought low. Instead, I felt a complicated mix of sorrow and vindication. I stepped aside to let him in. Emily was in the kitchen making dinner. She froze when she saw her. Brother, wooden spoon in hand, something like guilt crossing her face. You called him, I said. Not a question. She nodded. He needed to know I was here, that you'd let me come back. Kyle stood awkwardly in the entryway, looking between us. You're staying here? For now, Emily answered, until I find a job in town. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Emily turned back to her cooking, and I gestured Kyle toward the living room. We sat across from each other, me in my armchair, him perched on the edge of the sofa like a man prepared to flee. So, I said finally, you need help. He nodded, not meeting my eyes. The shop's in trouble. I've been behind on loans for months, and now with the property tax bill, he trailed off. I didn't know it was that high. I didn't realize how much you were handling all these years. That's the problem, isn't it? I leaned forward. You didn't realize a lot of things. Kyle ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his mother it made my chest ache. I know. And there's no excuse for what I said, for what we tried to do. I was wrong, Dad, we all were. Yes, you were. I wouldn't make this easy for him. So what is it you want from Sammy now? Money, he admitted, his voice small. A loan to cover the tax bill and keep the shop afloat until spring. I'll pay you back with interest. I swear. I studied my oldest son, this stranger wearing familiar features. When had ambition turned to entitlement in him? When had respect for what I'd built turned to resentment that it wasn't his yet? No, I said simply. His face fell. Dad, I'll lose everything, the shop, my house. Join the club, I cut him off. Wasn't that your plan for me? To lose everything except what you 3 decided to let me keep? He flinched as if I'd struck him. We were wrong. I was wrong. What more can I say? It's not about what you can say, it's about what you can do. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, snow was beginning to fall again. Heavy flakes catching the last light of day. When you see a man who's still standing on the land he built with his own hands, I said quietly, you don't call him useless. You sit down and you say thank you. Kyle remained silent. You want help? Prove to me you deserve it. Come work this land with me for a season. No shortcuts, no deals, just sweat. If you last through the winter, we'll talk. About that loan. His head snapped up. Work the farm, Dad? I have a business to run. A failing business, I reminded him. And I'm offering you a way to save it. Your choice. He stared at me, disbelief giving way to understanding as he realized I was serious. How long? Through winter. 4 months. You'll stay in the guest house, help with repairs, livestock, whatever needs doing. In return, you get room, board, and my consideration regarding that loan. And if I refuse, I shrugged, then I'll enjoy my dinner, and you can enjoy the drive back to Des Moines. The calculation played out on his face, pride versus desperation. Finally, he nodded. Okay, I'll do it. Good. You can start by fixing the pipe in the guest house. It burst when your brother abandoned it. I left him there and went to join Emily in the kitchen. She gave me a questioning look and I nodded. He's staying. In the guest house. Relief softened her features. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, I warned. I haven't forgiven either of you. I'm just giving you the chance to earn it. That night, after Kyle had gone to assess the damage at the guest house, Emily helped me with the dishes, the familiar routine. Reminded me of when she was young, standing on a stool to reach the sink, chattering about school and friends. Have you heard from Nathan? I asked, drying a plate. She shook her head. Not really. He was angry when I told him I was coming here. Said I was betraying them. Them? Him and Kyle. He thinks you're being unfair, punishing them for trying to help you. I set the plate down harder than intended. Is that what they're calling it? Helping? That's how they see it, she said carefully. Or at least, that's what Nathan's telling himself. I wondered if Nathan would show up too, once word got out that his siblings were here. Somehow, I doubted it. Of my 3 children, Nathan had always been the most stubborn, the most resentful of farm life. He'd been the first to leave and had returned only when he needed something. He'll come around, Emily said, as if reading my thoughts. Or he won't. I smiled, despite myself, hearing my own words to Martha echoed back to me. Either way, I'll be here, I finished. The next morning dawned clear and bitterly cold. I was up at 5, as always, feeding the chickens and checking on the 2 dairy cows I kept. To my surprise, Kyle was already outside, awkwardly trying to mend the split pipe in the guest house with hands unused to such work. You're doing it wrong, I called, walking over. You need to cut out the damaged section first. He straightened, red-faced from effort and cold. I don't have the right tools. There's a pipe cutter in the barn, second shelf on the left. He trudged off toward the barn, and I watched him go, remembering all the times I'd taught him to fix things as a boy. He'd been eager then, proud to learn. Somewhere along the way, he decided that paying others to fix things made him more successful than knowing how to fix them himself. Maybe there was still time to unteach that lesson. By noon, with my guidance, he'd repaired the pipe and was working on replacing the damaged drywall. His hands were blistered, his designer jeans covered in plaster dust, but he hadn't complained once. There was something almost like the old Kyle in his determined expression. I made sandwiches and brought one out to him. We ate in silence, sitting on the guest house steps. Thank you, he said finally, for the sandwich and for showing me how to fix the pipe. I nodded. You used to know. You used to follow me around with my toolbox, begging to help. A faint smile touched his lips. I remember. Mom would get so mad when I'd track mud into the house after helping you in the fields. She wasn't really mad, I said. She was proud of you, of all of you. His smile faded. She'd be disappointed in us now, wouldn't she? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. As I stood to go, Kyle caught my arm. I meant what I said, Dad. I'm sorry for everything. I looked into my son's eyes, Martha's eyes, and saw genuine regret there. It wasn't enough. Not yet. But it was a start. Prove it, I said simply, and walked back to the house to begin the long winter of redemption. December turned brutal that year, the kind of cold that makes your bones ache and your breath freeze before it leaves your lungs. The kind of snow that doesn't just fall, it buries. For Kyle, it was a baptism by ice. Each morning began the same way. Darkness, bitter cold, and work that couldn't wait. Livestock needed feeding no matter the temperature. Pipes needed checking. Snow needed clearing. I'd wake him at 5 a.m. with a knock on the guest house door, sometimes having to pound harder when he didn't answer right away. This is insane, he muttered one morning, as we trudged through knee-deep snow to the barn. Nobody should be awake at this hour. Farmers are, I replied simply. Animals don't know it's Sunday. Slowly, reluctantly, Kyle fell into the rhythm of farm life. His city-soft hands grew calloused. His designer clothes gave way to practical workwear, flannel shirts, thermal underwear, sturdy boots. The manicured nails his wife insisted on became perpetually dirty, broken from labor. And something else changed too. The entitled impatience in his eyes faded, replaced by a tired but steady resolve. Emily, meanwhile, had found work at the Cedar Falls Library. It wasn't marketing, and it paid a fraction of her Chicago salary. But she seemed lighter somehow. She'd come home with books she thought I'd enjoy, cook, dinner most nights, and help with indoor chores without being asked. We didn't talk much about what had happened, the family meeting, the betrayal, the word useless, that still sometimes echoed in my mind during quiet moments. Instead, we built a new, fragile normal, a peace treaty written in daily routines and cautious conversations. Nathan remained conspicuously absent. No calls, no visits, no acknowledgement of Christmas when it came and went. Emily sent him a gift, a sweater she'd knitted herself during the long winter evenings. It came back unopened. "He'll come around," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe he won't," I replied. "That's his choice." January brought a blizzard that sealed us in for 3 days. Wind howled around the farmhouse like a living thing. Snow piled against doors and windows until the world outside disappeared into white silence. Inside, we played cards by lamplight when the power went out, took turns reading aloud from Emily's library books, and for the first time in months, laughed together. On the third night, as Emily slept upstairs and the storm finally began to ease, Kyle and I sat by the wood stove, nursing cups of whiskey-spiked coffee. "Why didn't you ever sell?" he asked suddenly. "All these years struggling with this place. You could have cashed out, lived comfortably somewhere warm." I studied the amber liquid in my cup. "This land isn't just property, Kyle. It's legacy. It's memory. Every tree, every field has a story. But is it worth it? The constant work, the isolation, the cold. That tree out front. The big oak. I planted it the day you were born. The apple orchard on the east side. Your mother's dream. She never got to see it fully grown." I looked up at him. "So yes, it's worth it. Some things you don't sell no matter the price." He was quiet for a long time. "I never knew that, about the oak tree. There's a lot you don't know about this place. About me." I set my cup down. "That's the problem, isn't it? You see an old man and worn-down buildings, you don't see the history, the meaning." "I'm starting to," he admitted quietly. The next morning, the world sparkled with ice and new snow. Kyle was up before I knocked, already clearing paths to the barn and checking on the animals. When I joined him, he was methodically breaking ice in the water troughs, his breath clouding in the frigid air. "The cows seem okay," he reported, "but we're running low on feed." "We," I noted, "not you." He caught my slight smile. "What?" "Nothing," I said. "We'll drive into town when the road's clear, get more feed." February brought a brief thaw, turning snow to slush and revealing the dormant land beneath. Kyle and I used the mild weather to repair fences damaged by winter storms, replace rotting boards on the barn, and prepare for the maple syrup season to come. "Dad," he said one afternoon as we worked, "I need to call the bank, about the shop." I nodded. "Use the landline. Cell service is still spotty after the storm." He disappeared into the house and I continued working, wondering what decisions he was making about the business he'd built. The business that, ironically, was now in jeopardy because he'd tried to take mine. He returned looking grim but resolved. "I'm selling the shop." I straightened, surprised. "You sure about that?" "No," he admitted with a hollow laugh. "But it's drowning in debt. Even with a loan, I'd just be postponing the inevitable. Better to sell now while there's still some value in it." I leaned on my fence post, studying my son. "What will you do instead?" He shrugged, looking out across the thawing fields. "I don't know yet, but I'm thinking maybe something simpler, something real." That night, I lay awake thinking about Kyle's words. Something real. Wasn't that what I'd been trying to show my children all along? The real value of work, of land, of family? Had it taken losing everything for Kyle to finally see it? March arrived with wild temperature swings, freezing nights and warm days perfect for maple syrup. We tapped the sugar maples in the north woods, hanging metal buckets to catch the slow, sweet drip of sap. Emily joined us on weekends, bundled against the lingering cold, her cheeks pink with exertion and fresh air. "I'd forgotten how beautiful it is out here," she said one Sunday, as we collected the day's sap. The city made me forget. Cities are good at that, I replied, making you forget what matters. We boiled the sap down in the sugar shack, a small outbuilding my father had built for this very purpose. The sweet steam filled the space, fogging windows and clinging to our clothes. It was hot, sticky work, but deeply satisfying. Kyle took to it with unexpected enthusiasm, carefully monitoring temperatures, straining the finished syrup into jars, designing handwritten labels. Walker Family Maple Syrup, they read. Eston, 1953. We could sell this, he said, holding a jar up to the light, admiring the amber color. At farmers' markets, local stores. It's better than anything in the supermarkets. I raised an eyebrow. That's your new business plan, syrup? He grinned, a real smile, the first I'd seen since before the family meeting. Maybe, or maybe something else from the farm, but something authentic, something with history, something real, I thought, but didn't say. As March ended, Kyle's commitment to work the farm through winter technically concluded. Neither of us mentioned it. He simply continued rising at dawn, continued repairing and building and planning. One evening, I found him at the kitchen table surrounded by papers, sketching layouts for raised garden beds and calculating soil needs. For summer vegetables, he explained. We could try some heirloom varieties, maybe set up a stand at the farmer's market. I nodded, hiding my surprise at his use of we. Is that all right? He asked, suddenly uncertain. I know our agreement was just through winter, but I thought... It's all right, I said simply, and left him to his planning. That night I called James Layton. I need to make some changes to the trust, I told him, and I'd like to talk about transferring partial ownership of the farm. To Kyle? James asked, sounding surprised. Yes, and possibly Emily, but not... I hesitated. Not Nathan, James finished for me. I understand. I'll draw up the paperwork. As I hung up, I caught sight of the oak tree outside, now fully visible as spring approached, the tree I'd planted the day Kyle was born. It had weathered countless storms, bent but never broken. Perhaps people could be the same way. April brought rain, endless sheets of it washing away the last stubborn patches of snow and turning the farm into a patchwork of puddles and mud. The fields were too wet to work. The roads occasionally flooded, but inside the farmhouse plans were blooming as surely as the daffodils Martha had planted along the drive. Kyle had thrown himself into researching sustainable farming practices, organic certification requirements, and direct-to-consumer marketing strategies. Each evening over dinner, he'd share new ideas, his excitement a stark contrast to the dismissive businessman who had sat at this same table in September. We could convert the north field to lavender, he suggested one night. It's drought-resistant, attracts pollinators, and there's a growing market for essential oils and dried flowers. Emily, who now joined us for dinner every night after her shift at the library, chimed in. The gift shop at the library sells local products. They'd take lavender sachets, soaps, that kind of thing. I listened, amused by their enthusiasm, but cautious about their urban idealism. Lavender's labor-intensive to harvest, I pointed out, and we'd need to invest in distillation equipment for the oils. We could start small, Kyle countered. 1 acre instead of 10, see how it goes. I noted again. You're making a lot of plans for land that isn't yours. The table went quiet. Emily looked down at her plate. Kyle set his fork down slowly. You're right, he said finally. I'm overstepping. This is your farm, your decision. I took a sip of water, letting the moment stretch. Actually, I've been thinking it might be time for some changes in ownership. Both of them froze, exchanging a quick, nervous glance. The memory of the family meeting clearly still raw. Not like that, I clarified. I'm not giving up control, but I am considering adding both of you to the trust, with partial ownership rights. Emily's eyes widened. Both of us? Really? Kyle's put in the work these past months, I said, and you've shown commitment too in your own way. Coming back, finding a job, rebuilding trust. What about Nathan? Emily asked quietly. I shook my head. That door remains open, but he needs to walk through it himself. I won't chase him. The next day, I drove into town to meet with James Layton. The paperwork was ready. Transfer of 20% ownership to Kyle, 10% to Emily, with provisions for how decisions would be made and profits shared. The farm would remain intact, protected from subdivision or development without unanimous consent. As I signed my name, I felt a weight lift. This wasn't surrender. It was evolution. The land would continue. The legacy would continue, but now with new hands to help carry it forward. "You seem at peace with this," James observed, notarizing the documents. "I am," I replied. "It feels right." When I returned home, Kyle was in the workshop repairing an old tractor seat. His hands moved with a confidence they hadn't possessed in December, tools now extensions of himself rather than foreign objects. "I signed the papers," I said from the doorway. "You and Emily are officially part owners of Walker Farm." He set down his tools and stood, emotion crossing his face in waves. "Dad, I don't know what to say." "You could start with thank you," he smiled. "Thank you. But why now? After everything?" I leaned against the doorframe. "Because you earned it. Not through entitlement or manipulation, but through work, through respect." That evening, we celebrated with a small dinner. Emily made Martha's special pot roast, following the recipe card written in her mother's careful handwriting. I brought up a bottle of whiskey I'd been saving for a special occasion. We toasted to new beginnings, to Martha's memory, to the land that had sustained 4 generations of Walkers. As Emily cleared the dishes, Kyle turned to me with a serious expression. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest." I nodded for him to continue. "If Nathan came back tomorrow, would you forgive him too?" I considered the question carefully. Forgiveness isn't something you earn through a checklist, Kyle. It's a choice made daily. You and Emily chose to come back, to rebuild what was broken. Nathan hasn't made that choice. But if he did, then yes, I'd forgive him. He's my son, no matter what. Kyle nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about calling him, telling him about the changes here, about everything." "That's your choice," I said. "But don't expect miracles. Some wounds take longer to heal." 2 days later, Kyle drove to Iowa City, where Nathan was reportedly staying with friends. He returned alone, tight-lipped and subdued. "How'd it go?" I asked as he hung his jacket by the door. "About as well as you'd expect," he replied. "He's still angry, says we're betraying him by sucking up to you." I shook my head. "Give him time." "I told him about the ownership transfer," Kyle continued. "He laughed, said you were trying to buy our loyalty. That stung, but I didn't show it." "And what did you say to that?" Kyle looked me in the eye. "I told him he was wrong, that this wasn't about money or land, it was about family, about respect." He paused. "I told him I was proud to be your son, and that when he was ready to remember what. That meant we'd be here." I felt a swell of emotion. Pride, love, vindication. The son who had once called me useless was now defending my honor. Life had a strange way of coming full circle. Spring continued its slow transformation of the land. Kyle and I plowed and planted, following both tradition and the new ideas he'd researched. We set aside an acre for lavender, as he'd suggested, and expanded the vegetable garden to include heirloom varieties. Emily created a website for Walker Family Farm, complete with our story and photos of the land through the seasons. We were in the north field one warm May afternoon, marking rows for corn planting, when Kyle suddenly straightened and looked toward the driveway. "Someone's coming," he said, shading his eyes against the sun. A dark blue pickup truck was making its way slowly up the drive, dust rising behind it. As it drew closer, I recognized it, Nathan's truck, the one he'd bought second-hand 3 years ago. Kyle and I exchanged glances, then set down our tools and walked toward the house. By the time we reached the yard, Nathan had parked and was standing beside his truck, looking uncertain. "Nathan," I said, stopping a few feet away. "Dad." He nodded stiffly, then glanced at Kyle. "Heard you two are business partners now." "Something like that," Kyle replied cautiously. Nathan kicked at the dirt, hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Emily called, said I should come see what you've been doing with the place." I hadn't known Emily had reached out to him. She'd been quieter lately, more thoughtful. Perhaps she'd been planning this reunion in her own way. "Would you like to see?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. He hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, why not?" We showed him the newly planted fields, the expanded garden beds, the repaired barn with its fresh coat of paint. Kyle explained our plans for the lavender field and the farmer's market stand. I watched Nathan's face, trying to read the emotions that passed. Across it, skepticism, surprise, and something that might have been regret. As we completed our tour at the porch steps, Nathan finally spoke directly to me. "Looks good. Different, but good." "Things change," I said. People too, sometimes. He met my eyes briefly, then looked away. Yeah, well, I should get going. Just wanted to see what all the fuss was about. Stay for dinner, Emily called, from the doorway where she'd been watching us. I made lasagna. Nathan hesitated, clearly torn. I don't know if that's a good idea. It's just food, Nathan, I said quietly. No strings attached. After a long moment, he nodded. Just dinner. Then I need to head back. That evening, the four of us sat at the kitchen table together for the first time since September. The conversation was stilted at first, careful. No one mentioned the family meeting, the word useless, the attempted land grab. Instead, we talked about neutral topics, the weather, Emily's job, mutual acquaintances from town. As Emily served coffee and apple pie, Martha's recipe, Nathan finally addressed the elephant in the room. So you two are playing farmers now, he said to Kyle, a hint of the old bitterness in his voice. Never thought I'd see the day. Not playing, Kyle corrected mildly. Working, learning. There's a difference. And you're okay with this? Nathan turned to me. After everything. I set down my coffee cup. I'm more than okay with it. I'm proud of them. They made mistakes. They owned up to them. They're doing the work to make things right. Nathan's jaw tightened. And I haven't? Is that what you're saying? You're here, I pointed out. That's a start. Summer arrived in all its green glory, transforming the farm into a lush, vibrant landscape. The lavender field bloomed in stunning purple waves, attracting bees and photographers alike. Our Saturday stand at the Cedar Falls Farmers Market quickly became a local favorite, selling out of fresh produce and maple syrup by mid-morning most weeks. Emily had cut back her library hours to help with the farm operations, discovering an unexpected talent for marketing our products. She designed beautiful packaging, managed our social media accounts, and coordinated with local businesses interested in carrying Walker farm goods. The shy, distracted daughter, who'd once scrolled through her phone during family dinner now, confidently negotiated wholesale contracts with area restaurants. Kyle had fully embraced farm life, rising before me some mornings, eager to implement new sustainable farming techniques he'd researched. The auto shop in Des Moines had sold for enough to cover his debts, with a small amount left over that he invested back into the farm. As for Nathan, his visit in May hadn't immediately healed all wounds, but it had cracked open a door. He called occasionally, asking brief questions about the farm or sharing news about a construction job he'd found in Iowa City. Sometimes weeks would pass with no word. Then he'd show up unannounced on a Sunday afternoon, awkward but present. I didn't push him. Healing happens in its own time, at its own pace. Some trees grow quickly, others take decades to reach their full height. Nathan was a slow-growing oak. It was late July when he arrived with a trailer hitched to his truck. Kyle and I were installing a drip irrigation system in the vegetable garden when we heard him pull up. "What's with the trailer?" Kyle asked as Nathan got out. Nathan shrugged, trying for casual but not quite succeeding. "Thought you might need help with haying season." "Coming up. Brought some of my tools, if that's okay." I kept my face neutral, though inside I felt a quiet joy. "We could use the help," I said simply. "Planning to start next week if the weather holds." Nathan nodded. "I took some time off. Could stay through August, maybe." Emily emerged from the house, wiping flour-covered hands on her apron. Her face lit up when she saw Nathan and the trailer. "Are you staying?" she asked, not bothering to hide her excitement. "For a while," he answered. "If there's space." "The guest house is yours if you want it," I offered. "Kyle's been living in the east bedroom since spring." Nathan looked surprised. "You moved into the main house?" Kyle nodded. "Easier to coordinate farm work. Plus Dad needs someone to argue with over breakfast." A small smile tugged at Nathan's lips. "You always were the argumentative one." "Says the king of stubborn," Kyle shot back. But there was no heat in it, just the easy ribbing of brothers, finding their way back to familiar ground. That evening, all four of us ate dinner together on the back porch, watching fireflies rise from the fields as twilight settled. Nathan was quieter than the others, but his presence felt more solid, less like a visitor and more like someone testing the waters of belonging. After Emily and Kyle went inside, Nathan remained, nursing a beer as I sipped my coffee. "They seem different," he finally said. "Both of them." I nodded. "They are. You too," he added after a pause. "You seem, I don't know, lighter, carrying less," I agreed. "Letting go of some things, holding, tighter to others." He picked at the label on his beer bottle. I've been thinking a lot about what happened last fall. It was the first time any of us had directly referenced the family meeting. I was wrong. We all were. Yes, I said, not making it easier for him. Some admissions need to be spoken in full. I was angry for a long time, he continued. At you, at life. Felt like Kyle. And, Emily always had it easier. Always knew what they wanted. He trailed off, searching for words. Drifted, I supplied. He nodded. Yeah, drifted. And then resented everyone who seemed anchored. I watched a bat swoop low over the yard, hunting insects in the gathering darkness. Your mother used to say you had too many possibilities in your head, that your problem wasn't lack of direction, but too many directions pulling at once. Nathan looked surprised. She said that? About me? She understood you better than you think. Better than I did, maybe. We sat in companionable silence for a while. The night sounds of the farm, crickets, distant cows, the creaking of the old house cooling after a hot day, wrapping around us. I'm sorry, Nathan finally said, his voice low but clear. For calling you useless. For trying to take the farm, for everything. I studied my son's face in the dim porch light. The stubborn set of his jaw, Martha's jaw, softened with genuine regret. The defensive anger that had burned in his eyes for so long now replaced with something humbler, steadier. I know, I said simply. Just like that, he asked, surprised. You forgive me just like that? I shook my head. No. Forgiveness has been growing all these months, with or without you here to see it. Tonight is just the harvest. He considered this, then nodded slowly. I'd like to be part of this place again. Not just visiting, really part of it. The farm? I asked. The family, he clarified. The farm too, maybe. I don't know yet. I just know I'm tired of drifting. I reached over and placed my hand on his shoulder, the first time I'd touched him since before the family meeting. Then welcome home, son. The next morning, Nathan was up at dawn with Kyle and me, pulling on work boots and accepting a thermos of coffee without complaint. We walked the fields together, planning the hay cutting, assessing which sections were ready and which needed another week. Nathan asked practical questions, offered suggestions based on his construction experience, gradually finding his place in the rhythm of farm work. August unfolded in a blur of activity. Haying season was always intense, racing against weather forecasts, working from sunrise to well past sunset, every muscle aching with the good pain of necessary labor. Nathan stayed the full month as promised, his natural, mechanical abilities proving invaluable when equipment inevitably broke down. One evening, as we finished storing the last of the hay bales in the barn, I found myself watching my 3 children working together. Emily tracking our yield on her tablet, Kyle and Nathan securing the barn doors against an approaching storm. Something tightened in my chest, not pain, but a fullness that felt almost like Martha's presence. They found their way back, I whispered to her ghost. All of them. Later that night, as thunder rolled across the farm and rain pelted the windows, I called the 3 of them into the living room. They came with curious expressions, settling onto the sofa and armchairs with the easy familiarity of people who belong. I've made a decision, I said, looking at each of them in turn, about the farm. Their faces tensed slightly, old wounds not fully healed. Kyle and Emily already have partial ownership, I continued. I'd like to add Nathan to the trust as well. Equal shares for all 3 of you. Nathan straightened, surprised. Dad, you don't have to. I know I don't have to, I interrupted gently. I want to. This land was always meant for all of you. Not to sell or divide, but to steward, together. What about you? Emily asked. It's still your farm. I'll retain controlling interest until I decide otherwise, I assured them. This isn't me stepping aside. It's me making room for you to step up. Kyle leaned forward. Is this really what you want? After everything that happened? I looked around at the living room walls, at the photos of 4 generations of Walkers, at the handmade furniture that had witnessed births and deaths, arguments and reconciliations. This farm isn't just land, I said slowly. It's legacy. It's the story of our family. I want that story to continue, with all of you writing the next chapters. Together. The next day, as Nathan packed his truck to return to Iowa City, I handed him a copy of the trust amendment James Layton had prepared. You don't need to decide right now, I told him. Take time to think about it. This isn't just about ownership, it's about commitment. He looked at the document, then carefully folded it and placed it in his jacket pocket. I'll think about it, he promised, and I'll be back for Labor Day weekend. As I watched him drive away, I felt no anxiety, no fear that he was leaving. For good. Something had shifted, a foundation repaired. Whether he signed the papers or not, Nathan had found his way back to being my son. Everything else was just details. Autumn painted the farm in fiery colors, turning the maple grove to gold and crimson, the soybean fields to bronze. A year had passed since the family meeting that had shattered and ultimately rebuilt our family. A full cycle of seasons, of growth and harvest, of dying back and renewal. Much had changed in those 12 months. The Walker family farm had evolved from a traditional corn and soybean operation to a diversified business that included organic vegetables, specialty crops like lavender, maple syrup production, and a small but growing line of value-added products, jams, dried herbs, flavored honeys from the hives Kyle had established in spring. Emily had left her library job to work full-time on the farm, taking charge of our marketing and sales operations. She'd moved back into the farmhouse permanently, converting the old sewing room into a home office where she managed our website and filled online orders. Kyle had settled into the role of operations manager, coordinating our planting and harvesting schedules, researching new crops and techniques, and handling equipment maintenance. His auto shop experience proved invaluable when machinery broke down, saving us thousands in repair costs. Nathan had signed the trust agreement in September, but continued working construction in Iowa City. He came home most weekends, gradually taking on responsibility for our building projects, a new greenhouse, expanded storage facilities, renovations to the century-old barn. His contributions were part-time but essential, his expertise in structural engineering complementing Kyle's mechanical skills and Emily's business acumen. As for me, I found myself in a role I'd never anticipated, mentor rather than manager, advisor rather than authority. I still worked alongside my children daily, still made key decisions about the farm's direction, but increasingly I found joy in watching them take initiative, solve problems, and build something new on the foundation I'd maintained. "You've created something special here," James Layton commented during one of his visits to the farm. "Not many families come back from the kind of fracture yours experienced." "They came back," I said, simply. "That was the hard part. The rest is just work." The anniversary of the fateful family meeting arrived on a perfect September day. Crisp air, cloudless sky, the scent of ripening apples drifting from the orchard. I spent the morning alone, walking the property, remembering where I'd been a year ago. Devastated, angry, believing I'd lost my children forever. That evening, we gathered around. The dining room table, the same table where they had once called me useless, where they had plotted to take my land. But tonight, it was set with Martha's good china, with candles and flowers from her garden, with food we'd grown ourselves. Kyle uncorked a bottle of wine as Emily brought out a roast. Nathan set down a small wrapped package in front of me. "What's this?" I asked, surprised. "Open it," he urged, the three of them watching expectantly. Inside was a carved wooden sign, Nathan's handiwork evident in the precise lettering and polished finish. It read, "Walker Family Farm, Eston 1953, growing stronger with each generation." "For the driveway entrance," Emily explained, "to replace the old one." "We thought it was time for an update," Kyle added, "something that honors the past but looks to the future too." I ran my fingers over the carved letters, emotion tightening my throat. "It's perfect," I managed. As we ate dinner, sharing stories and plans, I found myself watching my children's faces, really seeing them. Kyle, whose ambition had matured into purposeful vision. Emily, whose quiet sensitivity had blossomed into empathetic leadership. Nathan, whose restless searching had finally found direction in building and creating. They were not the same people who had sat at this table a year ago, calculating how to take what wasn't theirs. They had been broken and remade, just as our family had been, just as I had been. After dinner, as Emily cleared plates and Kyle poured coffee, Nathan cleared his throat. "I have an announcement," he said, looking slightly nervous. "I've given notice at the construction company." "You're quitting?" Emily asked, surprised. He nodded. "I'm going to focus on the farm full-time, starting next month." Kyle raised his eyebrows. What changed your mind? You've always said farming wasn't for you. This isn't just farming anymore, Nathan replied, gesturing around. It's something bigger, something I want to be part of, completely, not just weekends. I studied my middle son, seeing in him a certainty I'd never witnessed before. You're sure about this? More sure than I've ever been about anything, he affirmed. I've spent my life looking for something that was right here all along. Just took me a while to see it. Later that night, after the dishes were done and my children had retired to their rooms, I sat alone on the porch swing, Martha's favorite spot. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet, the crescent moon hanging low over the eastern fields. You were right, I whispered to her memory. They found their way back. They just needed time. I thought about the word that had wounded me so deeply a year ago. Useless. Such a small word to carry such pain. But perhaps it had been necessary. The catalyst that forced change, that shattered complacency, and ultimately rebuilt something stronger. I remembered Kyle standing on this porch last September, desperate and humbled, asking for help. I remembered my condition. Come work this land with me for a season. No shortcuts, no deals, just sweat. If you last through the winter, we'll talk. He had done more than last the winter. He had embraced it, learned from it, been transformed by it, and in doing so had helped transform our family. The next morning dawned clear and cool, promising another beautiful day. I was up at my usual time, making coffee in the quiet kitchen, when Kyle appeared, already dressed for work. Thought I'd check the north field, he said, pouring himself coffee. See if that section is ready. For harvest, I nodded. I'll come with you. We walked in comfortable silence across dew-damp grass, the sun just beginning to rise over the eastern woods. The farm stretched around us. Not just land, but legacy. Not just property, but promise. As we reached the oak tree I'd planted the day Kyle was born, now tall and strong, its leaves beginning to turn gold at the edges, I stopped. Do you remember what I told you last winter? I asked. When you asked why I never sold this place? He nodded. You said some things you don't sell, no matter the price. I also said every tree, every field has a story. I placed my hand on the oak's rough bark. This tree's story is your story, planted the day you were born, grown through storms and droughts, still standing. Kyle was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. I never knew, he said finally. All those years I never really saw this place. Now you do, I said simply. We continued our walk to the north field, discussing crop rotation and harvest timing, planning for next season, even as this one approached its end. The circle continuing, the story writing itself forward. That evening, as all four of us gathered on the porch watching, sunset paint the sky in pink and gold, Emily raised her glass in an impromptu toast. To the farm, she said, and to Dad, who taught us what it really means to tend something worth keeping. To stubbornness, Nathan added with a smile, the Walker family trait that saved us all. To second chances, Kyle finished, looking at me, and to the most useful man I know. I raised my glass, my heart full. To family, I said simply, the only crop that truly matters. As darkness settled over the farm, I thought about the journey of the past year, from betrayal to redemption, from broken trust to something stronger and more honest than what had existed before. I thought about the word useless and how it had lost all power, washed away by months of shared work, shared purpose, shared healing. I remembered what I'd said to Kyle on that desperate evening when he'd returned. When you see a man who's still standing on the land he built with his own hands, you don't call him useless. You sit down and you say thank you. Now, a year later, those words had been answered, not just with words but with actions, with commitment, with return. My children had come home not to take, but to build. Not to claim, but to contribute. They had learned finally the difference between inheritance and legacy. One is merely received, the other is earned through stewardship, through respect, through love that demands more than entitlement. The farm would continue, evolving with each generation, rooted in the values that had sustained it for decades: hard work, integrity, family. And I would continue to, no longer afraid of becoming obsolete or being cast aside, because the truth was simpler than any of us had realized. No one is useless who tends what matters, who builds what lasts, who loves what deserves loving. That night, as I readied for bed in the room Martha and I had shared for 30 years, I felt her presence more strongly than I had in a long time. Not grief, but gratitude. Not loss, but legacy. "We did it, Martha," I whispered into the quiet darkness. "We raised them right after all." Outside my window, the farm rested under starlight. 40 acres of memory and promise, of past and future, of roots that run deep and branches that reach for the sky. My land, our land, the land that had nearly divided us and ultimately brought us back together. All of us, still standing.